Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Nobody, and today I'm bringing you another reading of some classic literature, and I'll talk a little bit about the book. First, just to introduce you, the book is H. Rider Haggard's King Solomon's Mines. Now, this is a very interesting book. A lot of people these days actually don't know it anymore, but you have definitely felt its influence. Do you know who Indiana Jones is? Then you have been influenced by this book. So this is basically the original Indiana Jones. This is the original adventure story. H. Rider Haggard himself was a bit of an adventurer, and he was a writer, and he wrote fictionalized accounts of his adventures, and that sort of turned into a lot of the adventure stories that we know and love today. And so his hero, Alan Quartermaine, who, if you may have heard of him, there was this movie called The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, where they tried to kind of make a superhero team out of characters from classic literature, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Alan Quartermaine and other characters like that. It was a weird movie. It did not come off that well. It was when people were still kind of figuring out how to do comic book movies, but Alan Quartermaine was played by Sean Connery, which was a fun choice. At least I enjoyed watching the movie. Not so much for the movie. I don't know, just to see the fact that they actually tried to bring Alan Quartermaine as a literary character in, and the fact that he was played by Sean Connery was, I thought, a great choice. I could definitely see him as an older Alan Quartermaine. Now, this is one of the most famous of all the stories, King Solomon's Mines. Classic story of so many stereotypes that if you've read a lot of British literature, or also I'd say if you've read even just like those Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge comic books, or watched DuckTales, this is where so much of that comes from. The idea of traveling, crossing deserts, climbing over mountains, finding hidden temples with treasure inside them. That's King Solomon's Mine. It's a classic story taking place in Africa a long time ago. This is an old book. If you have not had a chance to read a lot of old literature and learn how to read literature of this period, it is kind of a skill. You know, you need to let yourself enter into the period. And it is very interesting. It is from, pre-industrialization of Africa. It's very much a time when Africa is still a mystery, when people don't really know what's in it. They don't really know what people are in there. Africa was very difficult to penetrate. There was a time where the average lifespan for a European in Africa was something like 6 months. And so Europeans really just did not enter into the Africa. They did not penetrate the coast of Africa that much, except for a few sort of adventurous people, some doctors, some missionaries. Very few people got in there until partly just medicine was better, because you couldn't survive. We didn't. White Europeans did not have resistance to the diseases there. They didn't know the maps. It was very difficult negotiating the political situations of all these different tribal lands that you were passing through. And then another problem is Africa is a geographically difficult continent. It does not have large navigable rivers like North America or Europe, or even China, where you have these big rivers that drop at nice steady rates. The rivers of Africa have enormous waterfalls, rapids, all sorts of barriers to connection between the different regions. You have these huge deserts, you have vast plains, you have mountains. So it's a difficult and mysterious place. And at this time, it was very much a mysterious place. You wonder what's out there. And this is the story of Sir Henry and Alan Quartermaine, and they also have a friend named Good, and they all go off. They're trying to find, there's this guy called Da Silvestra who made it back with like a map and a diamond, and they're looking for King Solomon's Mines, and it takes them across the desert and over the mountains. And they have with them a companion, a local, and he wants to come with them. He's helps them. He's like their hired guide and servant. But along the way, you realize, wow, this guy's really tough. This guy's really capable. And then when they eventually get there, it's this classic story of Well, it turns out he's actually the true heir to the kingdom that they arrive at, and they have to help him retake his kingdom from this usurper king. And so that's a lot of fun. But I'm actually going to skip ahead a little bit. I'm going to read something, much later. The people group, this tribe, they're called the Kukiwanas, and they're supposed to be gigantic and strong. You can kind of see some of the legends of the Zulus and stuff like this. They're this very powerful and sophisticated race of Africans. It's very much like Black Panther, basically, like the Black Panther and that whole country. This is very similar. It's like a hidden country ringed in by mountains that nobody knows about, that is actually very powerful, very sophisticated, but their true king has been separated out. I believe Ignosi was his name, and the king they're trying to overthrow is Twala. And he's supported by a witch, Gagul. Eventually, there's a big fight. It's very similar to, it has some similarities to Black Panther. Ignosi kills Twala, takes the kingship. And as a reward, he says, hey, for gaining me the kingdom, I'm going to give you access to this sacred mountain of this old mine. And it's this mine from long, long ago, and it's also where they used to bury their kings. And so Gagul, the witch, who's this horribly old, horribly evil schemer who's been behind the scenes of everything, has been commanded to take them and take them to the mine so they can see. And so they're in there, and they're also with Fulata. She is a young woman who they become friends with, and she's particularly fond of Good, I believe, and they fall in love. I mean, this is a very old book. Let's see. H Rider Haggard was born in 1856. Published in 1885, but there is a cross-racial romance in here, and they sort of bring up the fact that it's like, well, no one had really thought through how that was going to work, especially since they're from these completely distant cultures, but nevertheless, it's in there, so of course, I'm going to just give you some of it. This is one of my favorite parts where I'm just going to cheat for you a bit. We're going to read where they find the treasure. Okay. Look in that corner, Curtis, I said, indicating the spot Gagul had pointed out. Hello, you fellows, he said. Here's a recess. Great heavens, look here! We hurried up to where he was standing in a nook, something like a small bay window. Across the walls of this recess were placed 3 stone chests, each about 2 feet square. 2 were fitted with stone lids. The lid of the third rested against the side of the chest, which was open. Look, he repeated hoarsely, holding the lamp over the open chest. We looked, and for a moment could make nothing out on account of a silvery sheen that dazzled us. When our eyes got used to it, we saw that the chest was 3 parts full of uncut diamonds, most of them of considerable size. Stooping, I picked some up. Yes, there was no mistake about it. There was an unmistakable soapy feel about them. I fairly gasped as I dropped them. We're the richest men in the world, I said. Monte Cristo is a fool to us. We shall flood the market with diamonds, said Good. Got to get them out of there first, suggested Sir Henry. And we stood with pale faces and stared at each other, with the lantern in the middle and the glimmering gems below, as though we were conspirators about to commit a crime, instead of being, as we thought, the 3 most fortunate men on earth. When old Gagul behind us as she flitted about like a vampire bat. There are the bright stones that ye love, white men. As many as ye will, take them, run them through your fingers, eat of them, drink of them. There was something so ridiculous at that moment to my mind in the idea of eating and drinking diamonds that I began to laugh outrageously, an example which the others followed, without knowing why. There we stood and shrieked with laughter over the gems that were ours, which had been found for us thousands of years ago by the patient delvers in the great hole yonder, and stored for us by Solomon's long-dead overseer, whose name perchance was written in the letters stamped on the faded wax that yet adhered to the lids of the chest. Solomon never got them, nor David, nor da Silvestra, nor anybody else. We had got them. There before us were millions of pounds worth of diamonds and thousands of pounds worth of gold and ivory, only waiting to be taken away. Suddenly the fit passed off, and we stopped laughing. "Open the other chests, white men," croaked Gagool. "There are surely more therein. Take your fill, white lords." Thus adjured, we set to work to pull up the stone lids on the other two. First, not without feeling a feeling of sacrilege, breaking the seals that fastened them. Hurrah! They were full too, full to the brim. At least the second one was. No wretched da Silvestra had been filling goat skins out of that. As for the third chest, it was only about a fourth full, but the stones were all picked ones, none less than 20 carats, and some as large as pigeon eggs. Some of these biggest ones, however, we could see by holding them up to the light, were a little yellow, off-colored, as they call it at Kimberley. What we did not see, however, was the look of fearful malevolence that old Gagool favored us with as she crept like a snake out of the treasure chamber and down the passage toward the massive door of solid rock. Hark! Cry upon cry comes ringing up the vaulted path. It's Fulata's voice. "Oh, Bhagwan! Help! Help! The rock falls!" "Leave go, girl! Then help! Help! She stabbed me!" By now we're running down the passage, and this is what the light from the lamp falls on. The door of rock is slowly closing down. It is not 3 feet from the floor. Near it struggle Fulata and Gagool. The red blood of the former runs to her knee, but still the brave girl holds the old witch, who fights like a wild cat. Ah, she's free. Fulata falls, and Gagool throws herself on the ground, to twist herself like a snake through the crack of the closing stone. She is under. Ah, God, too late, too late. The stone nips her, and she yells in agony. Down, down it comes, all 30 tons of it, slowly pressing her body against the rock below. Shriek upon shriek, such as we never heard. Then a long, sickening crunch, and the door was shut, just as we, rushing down the passage, hurled ourselves against it. It was all done in 4 seconds. Then we turned to Fulata. The poor girl was stabbed in the body, and could not, I saw, live long. "Ah, Bhagwan, I die," gasped the beautiful creature. "She crept out, Gagool. I did not see her. I was faint, and the door began to fall. Then she came back and was looking up the path, and I saw her come in through the slowly falling door and caught her and held her, and she stabbed me. And I die, Bhagwan." Poor girl," Good cried, and then, as he could do nothing else, he fell to kissing her. "Bhagwan," she said after a pause, "is Makuma-san there? It grows so dark. I cannot see." "Here I am, Fulata." "Makuma-san, be my tongue for a moment, I pray thee, for Bhagwan cannot understand me, and before I go into the darkness, I would speak a word. Say on, Fulata, and I will render it. Say to Bhagwan that I love him, and I am glad to die because I know he cannot cumber his life with me. The sun cannot mate with the darkness, nor the white with the black. Say that at times I have felt as though there were a bird in my bosom, which would one day fly hence and sing elsewhere. Even now, though I cannot lift my hand and my brain goes cold, I do not feel as though my heart were dying. It is so full of love that could live 1,000 years and yet be young. Say that if I live again, mayhaps I will see him in the stars, and that I will search them all, though perchance I should still be black, and he still be white. Say, nay, Makuma-san, say no more. Say that I love. Hold me closer, Bhagwan. I cannot feel thy arms. Oh. She's dead. She's dead, said Good, rising in grief, the tears running down his ominous voice. You need not let that trouble you, old fellow, said Sir Henry. Hey, said Good, what do you mean? I mean you'll soon be in a position to join her. Man, don't you see that you were buried alive? Until Sir Henry uttered these words, I do not think the full horror of what had happened had come home to us, preoccupied as we were with the sight of poor Falada's end. But now we understood. The ponderous mass of rock had closed, probably forever, for the only brain which knew its secret was crushed to powder beneath it. This was a door that none could hope to force with anything short of dynamite in large quantities, and we were on the wrong side of it. For a few minutes we stood horrified there over the corpse of Fulata. All the manhood seemed to have gone out of us. The first shock of this idea of the slow, miserable end that awaited us was overpowering. We saw it all now. That fiend Gagul had planned this snare for us from the first. It would have been just the jest her evil mind would have rejoiced in, the idea of the 3 white men, whom for some reason of her own she had always hated, slowly perishing of thirst and hunger in the company of the treasure they had coveted. I saw the point of that sneer of hers about eating and drinking the diamonds now. Perhaps somebody had tried to serve the poor old Don in the same way, when he abandoned the skin full of jewels. "This'll never do," said Sir Henry hoarsely. "The lamp will soon go out. Let's see if we can't find the spring that works the rock." We sprang forward with desperate energy, and standing in a bloody ooze began to feel up and down the door and the sides of the passage, but no knob or spring could we discover. "Depend on it," I said, "it does not work from the inside. If it did, Gagul would not have risked trying to crawl underneath the stone. It was the knowledge of this that made her try to escape at all hazards, curse her." "At all events," said Sir Henry with a hard little laugh, "retribution was swift. Hers was almost an awful end as ours is likely to be. We can do nothing with the door. Let's go back to the treasure room." We turned and went, and as we did so, I perceived by the unfinished wall, across the passage, the basket of food which poor Falada had carried. I took it up and brought it with me back to that accursed treasure chamber that was to be our grave. Then we went back and reverently bore in Falada's corpse, laying it on the floor by the boxes of coin. Next we seated ourselves, leaning our backs against the 3 stone chests of priceless treasures. "Let us divide the food," said Sir Henry, "so as to make it last as long as possible." Accordingly we did so. It would, we reckoned, make 4 infinitesimally small meals for each of us, enough to support life for a couple days. Besides the biltong, or dried game flesh, there were 2 gourds of water, each holding about a quart. "Now," said Sir Henry, "let's eat and drink, for tomorrow we die." We each ate a small portion of the biltong, and drank a sip of water. We had, needless to say, but little appetite, though we were sadly in need of food, and felt better after swallowing it. Then we got up and made a systematic examination of the walls of our prison house, in the faint hope of finding some means of exit, sounding them in the floor carefully. There was none. It was not probable there would be one to a treasure chamber. The lamp began to burn dim. The fat was nearly exhausted. "Quartermaine," said Sir Henry. "What's the time? Your watch goes?" I drew it out and looked at it. It was 6 o'clock. We'd entered the cave at 11. "Infidus will miss us," I suggested. "If we do not return tonight, he'll search for us in the morning, Curtis." "He may search in vain. He does not know the secret of the door, nor even where it is. No living person knew it yesterday except Gagul. Today no one knows it. Even if he found the door, he could not break it down. All the Kukuan army could not break through 5 feet of living rock. My friends, I see nothing for it but to bow ourselves to the will of the Almighty. The search for treasure has brought many to a bad end. We shall go to swell their number." The lamp grew dimmer yet. Presently it flared up and showed the whole scene in strong relief. The great mask of white tusks, the boxes full of gold, the corpse of Fulata stretched before them, the goatskin full of treasure, the dim glimmer of the diamonds, and the wild, wan faces of us 3 white men, seated there awaiting death by starvation. Suddenly it sank and expired. So that's it. I first read this book because my grandmother gave it to me. I had heard about it from C.S. Lewis, actually. I was reading in one of his books, and he was talking about writing. And he talked about reading King Solomon's Mines and the part where they're trapped, and it's dark, and they think they're all just going to starve slowly to death underneath the great mass of the mountain, and how atmospheric that was. And I was like, this sounds like a fun adventure story. And then I went to my grandmother's house, and while I was there, I actually noticed that she had a leather-bound copy of King Solomon's Mines. And so that was the first original version of it I read. This is a later, cheaper paperback that I got for my kids. It's a fun story. It's exciting. It's engaging. It's very heroic. It's got danger. It's got romance. It's very much, classic adventure story, very Indiana Jonesy, and set in an interesting time too, a time where there were some white men in Africa. The European countries had penetrated into them, but still early on, during a time of mystery, during a time before railroads or things like that. And so, if you have a chance, it's a fun book to read. It's great if you're someone who grew up on adventure stories and want to kind of see, where did they begin? Where did some of these ideas come from? Even some of those stereotypes, some of those old ideas too, the idea of impressing people with a solar eclipse. That is from this book. That is how they managed to get themselves to not be killed by the Kukiwanas when they first meet them. And it is this, like I said, an idea that's been mined later on by ideas like Black Panther, which is a sort of more modernized version of that. Anyway, that's all for today. Have a great evening.